Most people consume content about growth and never actually grow. They read the posts, they watch the videos, they collect the motivation, and then go back to the same life. The same patterns, same excuses, same version of themselves. And this isn't it. The MindForge podcast exists for people who are serious about the mental work, the discipline, the identity, the hard internal stuff that nobody talks about honestly. And this podcast exists to go even deeper. Every episode, we take what's on the page and we crack it open. The stories behind it, the science underneath it, the application you can actually use. If you're looking for hype, you're in the wrong place. If you're looking to be challenged, to think harder, to leave every episode a little more clear on who you're becoming and what it's going to take, you're exactly where you need to be. I'm Caden Floyd. This is MindForge Podcast, brought to you by Warrior X Training. Let's get to work. If you've been following along, you know what we've been building. Struggle is the forge, discipline is the hammer, identity is the blade. And we've talked about why hard seasons don't break you, they shape you. We've talked about discipline as the only real bridge between where you are and where you're going. And we've talked about identity, why you can grind for years and still feel like something's missing if you don't actually know who you're becoming. But here's what ties all of this together. Here's the thing that either lets all of that work land or quietly cancels it out. And what that is the story that you're telling yourself. Because you can have the struggle, you can show up with the discipline, you can even have a clear picture of the identity you're building. And the story running in the background will still override all of it if you never deal with it directly. And that's what this episode is about. And I used to think that the problem was effort. Maybe if I just tried harder, I'd fix it. If I locked in more, I'd break through. But that's not always what's happening. Sometimes you're not stuck because you're lazy. You're stuck because some part of you still believes the old story. And that old story has more power over your behavior than your ambition does. And for me, there were seasons where I kept showing up. I kept grinding. I kept doing all the right things on the outside. But something still felt off. Because deep down, I was still living like someone who needed outside approval to feel solid inside. And that story shaped everything. It was how I trained, how I performed, how I interpreted failure, how I measured myself when nobody else was watching me. And that's the thing about a story. It doesn't always sound dramatic. Sometimes it sounds responsible. Sometimes it sounds humble. Sometimes it sounds like I'm just being realistic. But if it keeps shrinking your life, it's not truth. It's just a story. And the reason these stories stay alive is because repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity feels like safety. So even if the story is painful, it's known. Even if it's limiting, it's still predictable. Even if it's costing you something, your brain still reaches for it because it knows how to survive inside of it. And that's why people stay in patterns that they hate. That's why they keep putting off the thing they say matters most. Not because they want to, but because the story that they keep telling themselves about it feels real. And the longer that you repeat a story, the more evidence your brain thinks it has. So maybe you miss a workout and the story says, see, I told you. Maybe you fall off for a week and it says, yep, that sounds about right. Or you hesitate one time and it says, that's just who you are. But that's how the story wins. And it's not all at once, but it's just enough, one repetition at a time, until it starts sounding like a fact. And now every story has a cost. Some cost you consistency. Some cost you peace. Maybe some of them cost you relationships. Some cost you years. And a lot of times, the biggest cost is actually invisible. You don't notice how much the story is draining you because you've built your life around working inside of it. and you start arranging everything around the belief instead of challenging it. If the story says you're not disciplined, you're going to over-explain your inconsistency. If the story says that you're not enough, you'll always chase people's approval. If the story says that you always fall short, you'll stop aiming so high just to avoid disappointment. But that's how the story becomes what I call a ceiling. Not because it's the truth, but because it's untreated. Now, if you want to change the goal, you have to get honest about the sentence underneath it. I'm going to break this down. I want you to name the area where you keep feeling stuck. I'm going to give you some examples. Something in the health. Maybe it's work and career, certain relationships in your life, certain habits, or the way that you talk to yourself when nobody's around you. And then ask yourself, what story am I believing that keeps this pattern alive? And write the first answer that comes up. It doesn't have to be polished, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the real honest answer. Because the story is usually hiding in plain sight. Now, I actually put together some examples from some of my clients doing this exercise, and with their permission, I have inputted their answers. So I'm going to give you a couple examples to help you find some direction. So some of the examples are, I'm behind. I always mess this up. I'm not the kind of person who follows through. It's just too late for me. Well, other people have something that I just don't have. But that's the sentence that you have to confront. It's not to shame yourself, but it's to create clarity, to start seeing clearly. Because what you can name, you can work with, but what you keep vague stays in control. So once you find the story, don't jump straight to pretending that it's gone. That doesn't work. You don't erase a story by denying it. You replace it by building something truer. So start with evidence. What in your life has already proven that the old story ignores? If the story says that you never follow through, where have you already shown consistency? If the story says that you're not enough, where have you already been more than enough? Because the replacement story has to be real enough to stand up under pressure. It's not fake confidence, it's not wishful thinking, but it's truth. So some of the examples that I have here are, I have fallen off before, but I also come back. I have doubted myself before, but I have still built things. I have been inconsistent, but I am not incapable. That's how change starts. It's not with hype, it's not with fake motivation, it's with honesty with yourself. And a lot of people think that they do need more motivation, but they don't. What they need is a cleaner story. Because motivation can get you moving, which is helpful, but a story determines whether you keep going when it gets hard. And that's why so many people start strong and fade out. Because the motivation was real, but the story was still old. The goal doesn't just need effort. What it needs is alignment. It needs a version of you that no longer keeps voting for that old belief. Because like I've said in previous episodes, every choice that you make is a vote. Every excuse that you make is a vote. Every avoided action is a vote. Every time that you show up anyway, that's a vote. And over time, the votes will build your identity. And that's what this really is about. It's not becoming perfect. It's not becoming untouchable. It's becoming honest enough to stop repeating the story that keeps you stuck. So I'm going to reread the quote that I've used this week in the blog and for this podcast. And the quote is, "The only thing standing between you and your goal is the story you keep telling yourself as to why you can't achieve it." But I'm going to say it a little bit differently. The story is not just standing in the way. It is the way. It's the filter. It's the lens. It's the silent script behind your habits, your choices, and most importantly, your identity. So if you want the goal, you have to deal with the story. Name it, challenge it, and then replace it with something truer. And then keep moving like that story is no longer in charge. And that's the shift. Now, I want to leave you with something before we close this out. Everything that we talked about today, the story, the ceiling, the cost of leaving it unnamed, that is the foundation. But a foundation without a structure is just concrete on the ground. So next week, we build. And here's what I want you to sit with before then. Look at your life right now across these 4 areas: your habits, your relationships, the content that you're consuming, and the environments you're spending time in. And just look. You don't have to fix anything. You don't have to justify anything. Just ask yourself one honest question in each area. Is this filling me up, or is it draining me? That's it. That's your homework before episode 6. Because next week, we're running the full audit. And if you've already started seeing your life through that lens, you're going to get 10 times more out of this. We're going to go area by area and find the story underneath each drain and start replacing it with something that actually holds. Now, the quote we opened with says, "The only thing standing between you and your goal is the story that you keep telling yourself." And I believe that. But I'm going to take it a step further. The story doesn't just live in your head. It lives in your habits. It lives in who you keep around. It lives in what you watch, what you listen to, and what you scroll through. It lives in the rooms that you keep walking into, even when they make you smaller. And that's what this audit is going to expose. And that's what we're doing next week. So don't skip it, because this is where it gets real and raw. The Forge is still on. Keep becoming, stay strong, and I'll see you guys next week. That's a wrap on today's episode. If this hit home for you, go read the companion post over on the MindForge blog at warriorxtraining.com. That's where it all starts. Every episode lives inside one of those posts, so if you want the full picture, that's where you go. Follow the show, share it with someone who needs it, and I'll see you back here next week. I'm Caden Floyd. Stay in the Forge.